Hi guys, Dr. J here. So in this video, we'll continue going through regulations, and the first kind of section that we'll go through is subpart A of part 107, general safety and compliance. So this is kind of general introductory types of issues, and kind of has the kind of information that you would expect of such a general section. So for example, 107.5, falsifying records. You're obviously not allowed to falsify, reproduce, or alter any record or report that is required by law to operate an unmanned aircraft, or commission another person to do so. And this could result in either the denial of an application for a remote pilot certificate or a certificate of a waiver. It could result in denial of declaration of compliance. This is for manufacturers. Could result in suspension of your certificate or even a civil penalty. And think jail time or fines, things like that. So not something that you want to do. Part 107.7 is about inspecting, testing, and compliance. And this here becomes a little more important because it refers to your requirements that you have as a remote pilot in command or as a drone pilot. You must have in possession, while you're flying, you must have your remote pilot certificate, a source of ID with photo, for example, driver's license. So the remote pilot certificate does not have a photograph on it, and so you need to have another source of photo ID so that you can prove to a requesting entity that you are a valid remote pilot. And you're also required to have in your possession whatever documents are required for Part 107 compliance. So this includes waivers if you're operating under a waiver. It includes a means of compliance statement for aircraft flown over people. And if you have renewed your written test exam results, then you'll have to keep a copy of those renewal exam results in your possession. And the recommendation that I've heard from others, and that I'll give you as well, is to keep a flight bag with an envelope that has all your papers, and also keep a PDF of these documents on your phone so that you always have them available. Who are you required to show this information to? So if you're required to have all this information, the idea here is that you will be able to show it and prove your the validity of your operation to a law enforcement officer or to someone from the FAA. And this is in fact what the law requires. So the remote pilot in command must make their certificate available to the FAA, any person authorized by the NTSB or the TSA, any federal, state, or local law enforcement. So this means that if a police officer, a DNR officer, a ranger, any person really authorized by the government to do ordinary requests for, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? You're required to show them your certificate. And that includes the people authorized by the TSA and the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB. The remote pilot in command must make any document, record, or report required to be kept under the regulations of this chapter available to the FAA. Sorry, I've got a typo there. That should say available to the FAA. What does this mean? So your pilot's certificate is required. You're required to show that to everybody. Any law enforcement officer can ask you for your certificate, and you must show them. The law so far, and this I think is an area which might change in the future, so definitely keep an eye on this. It doesn't necessarily require that you show information like waiver documents, method of compliance documents, those kinds of documents to other law enforcement except for the FAA. So the FAA, you're required to show basically everything. So if you've applied for a waiver and gotten a waiver from the FAA, by the way, I keep saying waiver. We'll talk about waivers later on. So if you're not sure what a waiver is, that's okay. We haven't talked about it yet. We'll talk about it in a different video. So you're required to show documentation for your waiver to the FAA. You're not necessarily required to show that to any law enforcement. But again, I would keep an eye on the FAA's actual webpage. Make sure that you're up to date on that law, because that may change. The remote pilot in command must allow the FAA to inspect and or test the aircraft, the remote pilot in command, the visual observer, the remote pilot, if they're different from the RPIC, the control system, basically any aspect of the UAS in order to determine compliance. In other words, the FAA is allowed to basically inspect your entire operation while you're operating in order to make sure that you're doing it legally. And then one final one in this section is accident reporting. Accidents must be reported within 10 calendar days. Note that this is regular days, not business days. And I say 10 calendar days. I guess by the end of the 10th calendar day from when the accident occurs, you must report to the FAA. And so I should just add in here, to the FAA within 10 calendar days of the accident. What is an accident? An accident is defined as serious injury or loss of consciousness to any person. So if you're flying your drone and it crashes into a person, it caused them serious injury, or they would have to go to the hospital. If it would cause them to lose consciousness for sure, you have to call an ambulance for the person. That's an accident. And in addition to that, damage to any property for which the repair exceeds $500. Now you might say, well, hold on a second. My drone costs more than $500. If my drone crashes, do I need to report that? And the answer is no. It's damage to any property which is other than your drone, external property, for which the repair exceeds $500. That's considered by the FAA to be an accident, and you're required to report that to the FAA within 10 calendar days.